What's up guys, KS here. Thanks for joining me today as always. So welcome back to another episode of If I Could Only Have One, and as a reminder with the If I Could Only Have One series, we're going to be taking a look at two guns, in this case the Steyr S9-A1 and the Beretta Apx Compact, and we're going to be taking a look at stats and features. There'll be some shooting along the way, we'll talk about the triggers, and at the end I will be announcing a winner. But here's the thing guys, as always, I feel like all the guns that I feature on the channel are great in one way or another. So I'm not really one of those type of people that proclaims that one gun is the best or anything like that. I think they're great, but I love an opportunity to challenge myself and perhaps challenge you guys to say, if you could only have one, which one would it be and why? So that brings us to today. Now we'll make sure that both of these guys are unloaded. Now, one thing about both of these guns right here, I classify, and I want to make sure that I get this out of the way soon, I classify both of them as subcompact, even though one actually says compact in the name. So before you start writing, and I know some of you guys probably are already writing some comments down below, the reason I classify these guys as compact, they carry less than 15 rounds. Both of them do, and I think that's sort of the sort of standard that at least I set in my mind for a compact gun. Something like maybe a Glock 19 or a Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0C, something like that, a 6-hour P320 compact, something, because those have 15 rounds. They're just a little bit bigger all the way around. So I classify these guys as subcompact. Take it for what it's worth. That's just kind of how I run with both of these guys right here. So let's knock a couple of specs out of the way to give you an idea of how these two stack up. The Steyr is 6.8 inches in length versus 6.97 inches on the Beretta. The height is 4.8 inches on both. The barrel length on the Steyr is 3.6 inches versus 3.7 inches on the Beretta. And then in terms of width, and I will give you a good look several times in this video, of course, but both of them are 1.3 inches. So we really are talking just a hair difference between the two so far. Now, weight unloaded on the Steyr is 26.7 ounces versus 26.4 ounces. So where we start deviating just a little bit is really mag capacity. Now the Steyr comes with two 10-round magazines. Now one of the quirks about this gun, and I said it in the original video, and I'm not really fond of this, you'll notice that the magazine, although it drops free when I'm holding the button down the whole time, if I just press the button, well, it's not a very good example right there. There's a good example. If I press and release the button really quickly, that magazine's going to stop. It's not coming out. It actually rubs against the frame just a little bit, and that kind of bothers me. But once you get past that, if you hold it just a little bit longer or yank it out, it's not that big of a deal. But in a stressful situation, of course, you want to make it as easy on yourself as you possibly can. Now on the Beretta, it actually has two 13-round magazines right here. Good construction, really good construction on both of them. But I have to say that Beretta chucks these things right out. It's not a problem at all. You make sure that you're clear and good to go. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some of the features of both of these guys. We'll spend a little bit of time with the Steyr and come back to the Beretta. Now, you guys will notice right off the bat, there's a lot of blue going on here. These are actually Sandpaper pistol grips, so if you're in the market to enhance your grips, be sure to check out Sandpaper pistol grips. I'm wheeling in the website down below. And there's a reason why I did this. Although I like the color blue, there was really a function to this. I found that the S9 had pretty slick grips. Now, I found the same with the M9 that I tested last year. However, there's a little bit more grip with the M9, and I felt that because there was a little bit more grip, a little bit more to hold on to, it didn't necessarily need grip tape. It's okay to have, but I didn't yearn for it like I did with this. This just really needed it. So I got this Sandpaper pistol grip, and it really solved the problem all the way around. I like it. I like the way they're cut. They are definitely usable and functional. But aside from the grip texture, the rest of the ergonomics I find to be not only fantastic, but also very interesting. Now, if you're a fan of a Glock, you know that Glocks have a pretty extreme grip angle. Well, Steyrs do as well. In fact, just a little bit more extreme in terms of grip degree, I guess we could say. But that actually means if you're used to that type of grip, this will be a very natural pointer for you. A little bit of a funny story shooting both of these guys together a little bit later on with that. But you'll also notice that the undercut right here is actually really sweeping. You can really get your hand as far up under that gun as possible, and you'll also notice that that bore is incredibly low. So this really turns out to be a pretty flat shooter and puts more of that pressure back towards you rather than trying to flip the gun up, which hopefully will help reduce a little bit of that muzzle flip for you. Now it does have one finger groove right here, and that does help the gun just a little bit, but again, with some of that lacking of grip texture, still needed these the grip tape right here. And there's a tiny bit of an undercut, but it really doesn't need much of an undercut because I think of this sweeping grip angle right here. So again, ergonomics overall, and this little thumb recesses right here, I love the ergonomics on the Steyr. I think they feel fantastic. I mean, I'm a big fan for sure. Now, aside from that, in terms of frame features, it does have an accessory rail for lights, lasers, grenade launchers. Now, on subcompacts, I don't really care about that. That's not a big deal. I'm not into throwing lights on this sort of thing, so not a priority to me. Plus, it's pretty small, so finding the right accessory is probably going to be a little bit of a challenge. Now, in terms of controls, it does have the magazine release right here, as you would expect. It is not ambidextrous. However, you can swap it around pretty easily, from what I understand. I have not tried it. I'm right-handed, so I haven't really had a need to, but you can definitely do that. However, the slide lock slide release, which I like, and I'll come back to that in a moment, it is not ambidextrous. Now, why do I like it? Well, here is why. You'll notice that it's actually sticking out just a little bit from the frame. I use these. I actually find them to be very convenient. So having it stick out just a little bit, because my natural grip is like this, I don't impede it. I don't do one of these sorts of things, and I know some people do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I grip it like this, so I'm able to access the slide lock slide release if I need to, and it's very accessible. But if you are going to hold it like this, you might run into some problems with last round hold open, just so you know. That's really it in terms of the Steyr. I mean, I think it's fantastic from an ergonomic perspective, but when we get into the Beretta Apx, things are just a little bit different. Now, you'll notice there's no grip tape on here whatsoever, and I don't feel like it really needs it. Now, it's got some really nice texturing right here. I would say this is pretty medium, pretty moderate. There's not a lot going on the side straps. However, on the back straps and front straps, I think they've actually made this just a little bit more aggressive than even its bigger brother, the full size. Now, I haven't tried the Centurion yet, so I don't know, but these are pretty aggressive. So what that means is your purchase is solid. I mean, this gun is going absolutely nowhere. Now, on both of these, of course, I can get basically almost a full grip on these guns. So between that aggressive grip texture and being able to get almost a full grip on it, there is really a lot to grab onto with this. Now, it does have a little bit, it's not quite as accentuated as the Steyr, but you can still get your hand pretty high up under here, which is nice. And actually, this sits pretty low as well. It sits a little taller than the Steyr, but not by much. So once again, that muzzle flip shouldn't be entirely too bad, although you can't really tell it from the shooting that I've been showing you on this so far. Again, funny story on that later. And then we do have a little bit more of an undercut right here under the trigger guard, which is fantastic. And of course, it does have, again, an accessory rail for lights, lasers, grenade launchers, that sort of thing. But again, pretty small. So I don't know what brand you're going to be able to throw on this. So if you know of something, be sure to share it down in the comments, as I know you will. Now, in terms of controls, there's your magazine release right here, this guy, and it is not ambidextrous again, but you can swap it around, not a big deal. I understand that to be a pretty easy process, but the slide lock slide release is ambidextrous out of the box, so a little bit of an advantage for the Apx for you lefties out there. Now, that's pretty much it in terms of controls. Now, you guys know I don't take the guns down in these videos, but I will say, go check out the independent videos on both of these guns, because both of these have kind of a unique takedown process, and perhaps a little bit more of a challenge than maybe a Glock or something like that, although certainly doable and you don't need any tools. Now, in terms of the slides, there's quite a bit going on with both of these in different ways. Now, you'll notice there are only serrations on the rear. Now, they're quite a bit of serrations right here. They go almost halfway up the gun. However, I notated in the first video that if your hands are at all sweaty or slick, you might run into some problems. I haven't found that it's quite as deep as I would have liked. So that's a little bit of a ding, although, again, it's not too bad. I haven't run into any major problems. I've always been able to rack it just sometimes you have to really knuckle down on it. The rest of the slide is pretty plain. I do like the fact that they contour it a little bit. And as I'm moving this gun right here, one thing you'll notice that's probably the most outstanding feature of the Steyr, at least in my opinion, are these sights right here. Now, these are the trapezoidal sights. I'll give you guys a good look at both of these because I think they're incredibly unique. You'll see there's a pretty good sized triangle right here, and it fits inside these little, I guess, half triangles or sides of triangles right here. So you just kind of line it up like this. And I think that's a phenomenal sight picture. I know there are a lot of people that don't really care for this very much, but I've actually found it to be very easy to pick up at the range and really get this gun going. I found the same with the M9 as well. Now, one thing I would really like to see are some high-def trapezoidal sights. They don't necessarily have to be night sights, although I'd prefer it. But at least maybe some bright orange or bright yellow, something like that. I may look into, doing some painting or something at some point in time, but I try not to do that as much as I possibly can. Either way, I think the sights are very unique, and I actually really like them. I think they're a lot of fun. They're very interesting, if nothing else. Now, the Beretta Apx is also very interesting, but it does things just a little bit differently. Now, with this slide, of course, the one thing that has always been outstanding, or at least very unique, and there are a lot of lovers and haters of this, are these slide serrations on the Apx. I mean, they are everywhere, and by and large, I find them to be very usable. Not too much of a problem whatsoever. I haven't found that I couldn't grip it. I know some people have said when your hands are wet or anything like that, they're very hard to work. My buddy Poe Performance proved, and you'll have to definitely check out some of his videos on the Apx. He proved even sweaty you can really run them. So I don't find them to be too big of a deal. And again, I haven't run into an issue at all either. These have had to kind of grow on me just a little bit. When I first checked out the gun when it first came to market, I wasn't quite so into it. It was a little bit too weird for me, but now it has really grown on me, and I actually like it. I think it's unique and different. I mean, it's a little bit of a fat kid sort of, but I kind of like it. And frankly, the S9's a little bit of a fat kid too in other ways. So everybody has kind of their preferences for sure. Now, in terms of sights, this does come with pretty standard steel white dot setup right here. So nothing too extraordinary. I'll give you a good look at that, of course. Now, that front sight, it's actually pretty good size. The camera doesn't seem to want to focus too much on it, but it's slightly larger than the rear dots right here. So I'll give you a little bit of a look at that. But I like the sights. They're fine. It's not a big deal. Now, one thing I found as I was shooting both of these together, I started with the Steyr and ended up with the Apx. And because I got used to the Steyr and the grip angle and everything, the Apx was absolutely terrible, and I'm probably wheeling in a tiny bit of that shooting. I'm not showing you very much of that because it was really not a good showing of it. I was shooting this extraordinarily low because I'd gotten used to the Steyr in a relatively short amount of time. So these two may not be good bedfellows, so to speak, in terms of shooting at the range, but on their own, they are both a lot of fun. Now, continuing on with the shooting, there were a couple of other things that I found, especially with the Steyr. Although I really like the way Steyrs shoot, I found that the S9 tended to have pretty erratic ejection. You guys are probably seeing that in the video that I'm showing you right now. In fact, a couple of times I had a few brass casings hit me in the head, and of course, that happened to be a day I forgot to wear a hat. It wasn't too big of a deal. It was maybe mildly distracting, but for me, it was more a laugh than anything else. I sort of have the philosophy of as long as those rounds are getting out of the chamber and they're not flying into my eyes, I'm in good shape. Now, I wear glasses pretty much all the time, so I have a little bit of, I guess, a safety layer, so to speak, with my eyes. Now, if I didn't have glasses, I might be a little bit more concerned about that, but aside from a couple of erratic ejections, it really was quite a pleasure to shoot, and I attribute a lot of that, of course, to the ergonomics, but also the trigger, which we'll get to in just a moment. Now, in terms of the Apx and shooting, the Apx really reminds me, believe it or not, of its full-size brother. I think they're both very similar in that they are relatively soft-shooting firearms, and they're pretty darn accurate, certainly more accurate than I am. Now, you're probably looking at the footage that I'm showing you right now and wondering what's going on. Well, if you remember my original video with this, I did a lot of filming with this, and it was after a pretty heroic dose of caffeine, so I've got the caffeine shakes something fierce. Well, I was shooting this. So it certainly was quite a challenge to to record those. I had a lot of laughs about it. Some other people at the range had some laughs about it as well. And I figure if you can't laugh at yourself, somebody else definitely will. But even with the caffeine shakes, the gun definitely did its job, and it was a lot of fun. I have shot it since then multiple times, including with the Steyr. Again, not a good mix between the two, but by themselves, I think both are great. Now with the Apx, again, I attribute a lot of that, of course, again, to its ergonomics, its soft shooting, and then the trigger. Now, speaking of triggers on both of these guys, let's take a look at these for here for just a moment. Now, I've said several times with Steyrs, whether it's the S9 or the M9, that out of the box, I truly believe that the Steyrs have some of the better triggers on the market. And I know that might be a bold statement, so you'll have to just go with me here for just a moment. Now, of course, it has that standard safety trigger right here, a little safety lever, and once you depress that, the trigger is ready to go. Now, you'll also notice that this trigger is pretty big, and that's actually a really good advantage. So once you depress that safety lever, there you go. That's it. That's all the distance you need right there. So there's not a lot of take up. And once you get to a nice solid wall, you have a really nice, really light, crisp break. It's coming at about 4.5 pounds, and that's just absolutely fantastic. I did do some remeasuring after about 400 rounds through this gun, and it's actually lightened up just a little bit. It was closer to 5 pounds in the original video, but it's definitely worn itself in a little bit, which is great. But then the reset, you probably heard it because I'm trying to shove this up to you guys as close as I can, also to get to that microphone, because that reset, although you can feel it, it's somewhat tactile, it is barely audible, and that's a little bit of a ding I give this trigger. But because the break and that take up is so good, I mean, it is so good, I'm really able to look past this reset just a little bit, because it is there, and this gun just begs to go fast. It really does. I mean, it's a fantastic shooter, and one thing I really like about a trigger like this, it means that you can focus more on ergonomics, and you don't have to worry quite as much about trigger pull, although it is extremely important, of course, but you can enjoy a really good trigger and just worry about getting those rounds down target, or down range rather. So I really like the Steyr trigger out of the box. Now, the Beretta does things just a little bit differently, although I've also said on the Berettas that the trigger actually is pretty good. Now, it also has the safety lever or safety hinge right here, not hinge, it's really just a lever, and then it depresses. Now, one thing I've noticed about the Apx more than some other guns out there, and you're going to have a hard time seeing this, but believe it or not, it really doesn't go all the way into the trigger housing. So if you're using the pad of your finger, and you guys know that I don't, but if you do, you are definitely going to feel this a little bit, and I always find that to be a little bit disappointing. I would prefer a little bit more of a flat trigger. Of course, I wrap my finger around, so it's not as big of a deal, but nonetheless, here is your take up. Once again, very little take up. Both of these triggers really, I mean, they are basically ready to go, and both being pretty flat, and then you get to your break. There's your break right here. Now this is 5.5, almost 6 pounds, so it's certainly a heavier trigger, but it's a great break nonetheless. It really is, and it's very tactile. And then when we get to our reset, there you go. There's your reset, and you're back out to the start. And the reset is fantastic on this. It really is. It reminds me actually a lot of Glocks, which I'm definitely a fan of. So we'll do this again. We've got our take up, not a lot at all, very smooth. And then our break. There's your break right there, certainly heavier than the Steyr by quite a bit, actually. And then your reset. And you're back out to the start. So both of the triggers on these guns really out of the box are fantastic. I mean, you know, there's always some tweaking you could potentially do on just about any gun, but I think out of the box, both of these are very satisfying, although in terms of trigger, at least for me, for this shooter, I do have to give the leg up to the Steyr just a little bit. So we're nearing the end of the video now, and like I said before, it's an if I could only have one, and the rules state that there has to be a winner. And these get harder and harder as I go along. Some have been incredibly hard over the last maybe 4 or 5 episodes, and this one is no different because I really enjoy both of these guns. Both of these guns are capable shooters. They've got a lot of interesting and cool features about them. They're both a little bit unique, certainly in terms of styling, but I think they both do the job. However, they do it just a little bit different. Now with the Apx, again, and I've said several times, I'm a fan. In fact, the full size earned an honorable mention in the year-end review last year, and I think the Apx Compact probably has a potential for doing the same thing because I actually really like the styling on this. It's grown on me quite a bit, and the ergonomics are fantastic. I mean, I love the grip texture on this. It's really nice. I love the fact that it's actually a modular firearm, so you can take the trigger assembly out and you can put it into different frames, and I think potentially down the road Beretta's going to have full frame and slide and barrel options, so you perhaps can have one trigger module and multiple guns, kind of like on the SIG P320s. But again, the Apx Compact is certainly a very solid gun. If I had to recommend it, I would have no problem doing so. I think it's well built. I think it's a good quality gun. They have some neat sales on this, and you can usually find it for a pretty reasonable price, somewhere in the mid fours, perhaps maybe lower fours, if you look around. So definitely worth checking out. Now with the Steyr, again, the Steyr does things just a little bit differently, but it is a joy to shoot for sure, but it's also extremely unique. I've said before, and I'll say it again, if you have the opportunity to shoot a Steyr, even if you're not thinking about getting one, I highly recommend you check one out, just for the experience, because they're just so wildly different. Not only because of the ergonomics, and again, I have no problem saying I don't like the fact that the grips are so slick, but being able to resolve that pretty quickly with some inexpensive Sandpaper pistol grips, it's not too big of a deal to me, but those ergonomics are just absolutely fantastic. Again, I've got a little bit of a Glock background, so this is relatively easy for me to get into without too much extra work at the range. So I like that, and I like the way it feels in the hand. I love how low it sits in the hand, and just the overall look of it. I mean, I think it's unique. I think it's different, just like the Apx. Both of these are certainly unique, and you're probably going to have some people talking about it or asking you about it at the range for sure. But I think the most outstanding feature on the Steyr has to be these trapezoidal sights. There's just something about them that's really weird and a lot of fun, and believe it or not, they're outstanding in terms of pickup and being able to run this gun really fast, at least in my opinion. So if I had to choose one, if I could only have one, believe it or not, I have to pick the Steyr S9. Although it's a little more quirky, and you've got the erratic ejection, I get that. But there's just something about this Steyr that's so much fun, and I look forward to taking it to the range every time. So that's it, guys. The Steyr wins the If I Could Only Have One, but only by a hair. So I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say about this. If you agree or disagree, if you've got experiences with either one of these, I am always looking forward to the comments and carrying on a conversation with you guys. So thanks so much for stopping by, and I will see you next time.